There are decisions a man makes at 9 o'clock in the morning in a quiet office on a Monday that nobody else will understand until weeks later. Those are the ones that hold. My name is Cole Edwards. I am 53 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer, bridges mostly, but also parking structures, a few hospital wings, one very complicated overpass interchange outside of Charlotte that I am still quietly proud of. I know how weight distributes. I know where the load goes when you shift something. I know the difference between a structure that looks solid and one that actually is. I just never expected to have to apply that thinking to my own marriage. Welcome to Quiet House Stories. Get comfortable and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. My wife, Diane, is a good woman. I want to say that clearly and at the start, because what I am about to tell you is not a story about whether I love her. I do. 26 years. I have loved her through a miscarriage and a layoff, and the year she couldn't get out of bed for 3 months, and I learned to make cornbread from a box because it was the only thing she would eat. I have loved her through a cross-country move and 2 rounds of her mother's health scares, and the spring her sister Patrice said something at Easter that Diane cried about for 3 days without explaining to me what it was, and I let her cry and made coffee and did not ask. I have loved her through all of it. What I am about to tell you is a story about her father, and about what I finally understood on a Sunday evening in March, about the weight I had been carrying for 11 years without naming it. Raymond Marsh is 74 years old. He is a retired sales manager from a medical supply company. He has an opinion about everything and a way of delivering it that sounds like helpfulness, but has the structural integrity of a bulldozer. He is not cruel in the way that loud men are cruel. He is methodical. He places an idea on the table the way you place a glass of water, gently, as if he's doing you a favor, as if you would be foolish not to drink. The idea he'd been placing on the table for the better part of 11 years was this, that the house Diane and I built together was, in some essential way, more Diane's than mine. He started small. That is how these things always start. In the early years, it was comments about the original purchase. Raymond had contributed $22,000 toward the down payment when we bought the house in 2012, which was generous, and which I thanked him for sincerely at the time. What I did not understand then was that for Raymond, $22,000 was not a gift. It was an investment. It was equity, not financial equity. He never said anything as direct as that. It was something murkier, a claim, a gravitational pull toward his daughter that he was quietly reinforcing every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every carefully offhand observation about whose name was on which document and whether things were properly set up. Diane didn't see it, or she saw it and found it easier not to address. I am not sure which, and I have spent more time than I should have trying to determine the answer. What I know is that by the time we were 11 years into it, Raymond had worked himself into a position where he believed, sincerely, genuinely, with the conviction of a man who has told himself a story so many times it has become autobiography, that my refusal to sign a particular document was not a legal decision, or a financial consideration, or a matter of my own autonomy. It was selfishness, my character failing, not his overreach. The document in question was a family trust restructuring that Raymond had drafted through his own attorney, not mine, that would have consolidated a house, a rental property I had purchased in 2019, and a portion of my retirement savings into a joint trust with Diane as primary beneficiary and Raymond himself as co-trustee in the event of my incapacitation. I am not a dramatic man. I don't make speeches. I don't slam doors. I have never once in my life raised my voice at Raymond Marsh, though I have had occasion to want to. When he first presented the document, 6 weeks before the Sunday in question, I told him I wanted to review it with my own attorney. He said that was fine. He said, of course. He smiled the way men smile when they expect you to come around. I did not come around. That is what Sunday dinner was about. It was March 9th, a Sunday. We were at Raymond and his wife Gloria's house on Elmfield Drive. The house Gloria has kept like a catalog photograph for 42 years. The kind of house where you can see your reflection in the stovetop. Diane's sister Patrice was there with her husband. 2 of Gloria's friends from her Tuesday morning book club were there. There were 8 people at the table, and Raymond waited until the pot roast was being served and the conversation was distributed and comfortable before he looked across the centerpiece and said it. "You know, Cole, I've been thinking about it, and I really feel like you're being selfish if you don't sign. It's just protecting the family. I want you to understand something about that moment. It was not the words. I had heard variations of those words from Raymond for 6 weeks. It was the table. It was the 8 people. It was Gloria filling Patrice's wine glass without looking up, and Diane going very still beside me, and Patrice's husband Gary staring at his plate with the studied intensity of a man reading the world's most interesting gravy. It was the audience. Raymond had chosen his moment the way a structural engineer chooses a low point. He wanted the weight of the room behind him. I looked at him. I took a sip of my coffee, which Gloria had made too strong the way she always did, and which I had always pretended was exactly right. I set the mug down. "I appreciate the concern, Raymond," I said. That was all. Diane glanced at me. I was already looking at the pot roast. The conversation moved on the way conversations do when nobody wants to pick up what has just been put down. I drove home alone that night. Diane stayed to help her mother clean up, which she often did. I pulled into the driveway on Sycamore Lane at 8:47 p.m., and I turned off the engine, and I sat there, the truck idle for a moment after I cut the ignition, the way old trucks do, like they're finishing a thought. The neighborhood was quiet. February had just let go of the month, and the dogwood in the front yard was considering blooming. Just barely. A few pale buds at the tips of the branches that hadn't committed yet to the idea of spring. I counted them. 11 buds on the lowest branch. That is something engineers do. We count things. We establish what is actually there before we start making decisions about what to do with it. I had built this house, not with my own hands, though I had done more of the finished work than most people would expect from an engineer. I mean, I had earned every dollar of its value over 31 years of work. The down payment Raymond had contributed was long ago absorbed into what the house had become, into the additions, the new roof, the kitchen Diane had designed and I had helped build over 2 summers. The $22,000 Raymond had given in 2012 had, by any reasonable accounting, been returned to him in family dinners eaten at our table, in holidays hosted, in the casual assumption that his daughter's home was also his home in a way that went beyond the visiting. I sat in that truck, and I let myself think it clearly for the first time. He wanted my name off the things I built. Not in those words, not exactly, but that was the weight of it. The trust restructuring would not have removed my name from anything immediately. It would have simply ensured that in the event of my incapacitation, Raymond Marsh, not my attorney, not a neutral party, not Diane alone, would be the co-trustee of everything I had built. I went inside. I made chamomile tea. For minutes, I always steep it 4 minutes. That is the one ritual I have held to since my father taught me, the same way he held to it, the same ceramic mug he left me when he died. And I sat at the kitchen table with the mug in both hands and my father's old leather briefcase open on the chair beside me. I had been keeping a file for 6 weeks, not because I knew what I was going to do with it, just because I am a man who keeps records. My father kept records. His father kept records. It is a habit that has served me better than almost any other I have. The file had copies of Raymond's document. It had my notes from 3 separate conversations in which Raymond had referenced the house, the rental property, or my retirement account. It had a 2-page summary I had drafted for myself in February, after reading the trust document for the 4th time with a highlighter, of every provision that would reduce my unilateral authority over assets I had built without his help. I am better at noticing structural weaknesses than most people. It is the engineering background, and I had known for several years, in the way you know a thing before you're ready to name it, that something in the architecture of my marriage, not between Diane and me, but around us, in the framework Raymond had been quietly building for 11 years, was not on hold the weight it was being asked to carry. I called my brother Dennis the next morning, not at dawn. Dennis is retired Army, and he keeps a reasonable schedule and doesn't appreciate calls before 7:30 a.m. unless something is on fire. I called him at 7:34. He answered on the second ring the way he always does. "Tell me," he said. That is how Dennis answers the phone when he can see it's me. He has done it for 40 years. It is one of the most useful phrases I know. I told him about the dinner. I told him about the document. I laid out every provision in sequence, the same way I would present a structural load analysis. Factual, ordered, no embellishment. Dennis doesn't need embellishment. He is the kind of man who receives information cleanly and processes it without theatrical reaction, which is a trait I have always admired, and which I suspect comes from 30 years of being in situations where dramatic reactions get people hurt. He was quiet for about 4 seconds after I finished. "You have your own attorney?" he said. "I have Beverly Holt." I said, "Elder law practice on Providence Road. I used her when we did our wills 2 years ago. Call her this morning," Dennis said, before Raymond decides Sunday dinner wasn't enough and comes back with something else. He wasn't wrong. Raymond has never in 11 years let a stalemate sit. He circles back. He reframes. He finds a new angle. That is not malice. It is a sales instinct that got him through 34 years in medical supply. But the instinct does not turn off when he leaves the office. It is how he is built. I should tell you something about the 6 weeks between Raymond presenting that document and the Sunday dinner, because I did not spend those 6 weeks doing nothing. I spent them doing what I do when I encounter a structural problem I am not yet sure how to solve. I read it. I read Raymond's document 6 times. I took notes in the margins in pencil. The fine point drafting pencil I have used for 30 years because I like the precision of it. I identified 11 provisions that I considered aggressive, 3 that I considered clever, and 1, the POA clause, that I could not fully parse without legal counsel, though something about it had been bothering me since the second reading. I also kept a log, not a journal. I am not a journal-keeping man. A factual log. Date, time, what was said, who was present. The way I would document anything on a job site where I suspected the documentation might eventually matter. I want you to understand that when I walked into Beverly Holt's office on that Monday, I was not walking in surprised. I was walking in prepared. There is a difference between a man who has been backed into a corner and a man who has taken 6 weeks to understand the room before he decides where to stand. I had been standing in the wrong part of this room for 11 years. I was choosing a different position. I called Beverly Holt's office at 8:14 that Monday morning. Her assistant, a methodical young woman named Renata, who always sounds like she is 3 steps ahead of everyone else on the phone, told me Beverly had a 9 o'clock opening if I could come in. I could come in. Beverly Holt is 58 years old. She has been practicing elder law in this city for 22 years. She has an office that smells like Goodwood furniture and filtered coffee, and a particular kind of calm that accumulates in a space where people come get clear about difficult things. She is not a warm woman, in the social sense of the word. She is precise. She listens to everything you say and asks one question that reorganizes all of it. I have always trusted her for this reason. Warmth can be performed. Precision cannot. I walked into her office at 9:03 a.m. on Monday, March 10th. I was wearing the charcoal blazer I keep pressed and ready because I have learned, over a long career presenting structure assessments to people who prefer not to hear the truth, that how you present yourself in a room shapes how the information lands. I was not there to be conciliatory. I was there to be clear. I set Raymond's trust document on Beverly's desk. I set my own folder beside it, the manila folder with a timeline and the records of every conversation in which Raymond had referenced the house, the rental property, my retirement account. 6 weeks of documentation. Beverly read for 11 minutes without speaking. I drank her filtered coffee and looked at the framed engineering prints on her wall. She has an Eiffel Tower cross-section and a Golden Gate load diagram, which I noticed for the first time and found unexpectedly moving. People who choose art like that for a law office are telling you something about how they think. Then she looked up. "He's made himself co-trustee," she said. "In the event of my incapacitation," I said. "And the rental property is your sole asset, not jointly owned. I purchased it in 2019. My name only. Diane knew about it. Raymond did not." Beverly nodded once. She was quiet for another moment, turning a page. Then, "He's identified the power of attorney language in your existing will as his access pathway. This clause," she pointed with the pen, not touching the page, is written broadly enough that a co-trustee with the right legal standing could invoke it before you've been adjudicated incapacitated. Not easily, but the pathway is there. I had not seen that. I had read the document 4 times, and I had not seen that. How long has that clause been in my will? I asked. 2 years, she said. I wrote it. The language was standard at the time. Raymond's attorney is sharper than average. I sat with that for a moment. The refrigerator in Beverly's small office kitchen hung behind the wall. Outside, Providence Road was doing what it does at 9:30 on a Monday morning. Traffic, voices, the ordinary world proceeding at its ordinary pace, entirely indifferent to what was happening in this room. There are 3 things we can do this morning, Beverly said. Do you want all 3, or the one you came here for? I told her I thought I'd come for all 3. What we did over the next 97 minutes was this. We drafted a revocation of the power of attorney language that Raymond's document contained, and revised a matching clause in my existing will, and had the revocation notarized at 10:08 a.m. by Renata. We amended my will to replace the broad language with specific named trustees under clearly defined conditions, none of which included Raymond Marsh or any member of his family. And we initiated the paperwork to transfer a 40% interest in the rental property at 1847 Clearfield Avenue into a separate trust, naming my daughter from my first marriage, Lynn's daughter Ruby, who is 7 years old, as the named beneficiary. Raymond had never factored Ruby into his calculations. She was not Diane's daughter. She was mine from my first marriage, a quiet and serious little girl who calls me every Sunday evening from her mother's house in Portland and tells me about things she has found. A feather, a beetle, a cloud that looked like a truck, an interesting crack in the sidewalk. Ruby is the part of my life that was never part of Raymond's architecture. She existed entirely outside his frame. Beverly slid the final document across her desk at 10:41 a.m. She handed me a pen, a good one, heavy, the kind that makes a signing feel like what it is. You understand this closes the co-trustee pathway entirely, she said. I understand, I said, and the rental property transfer is irrevocable once filed. I understand that too. She said it with a particular evenness, not warmth, not warning, just the precision of someone making sure you are present for what you're doing. This will cause difficulty. It already has, I said. There is a particular kind of quiet that falls over a man when he stops being afraid and starts being dangerous. It has nothing to do with anger. I was not angry. I had not been angry since I was a younger man with less patience and less information. What I felt, signing those documents on the 10th of March at 10:41 in the morning, was something closer to the feeling I get when I have correctly identified a load-bearing problem and designed the right solution. Not satisfaction, exactly. Certainty. Beverly filed everything the same morning. The property transfer was recorded at the county recorder's office at 2:17 p.m. that Tuesday. The amended will was executed and witnessed and entered into her secure document management system at 10:52 a.m. The POA revocation was notarized, filed, and a certified copy dispatched by mail to Raymond Marsh at 3144 Elmfield Drive. Beverly sent that last piece without my asking. She said it was standard practice when a third party has already made an attempt to access an estate mechanism. I appreciated that she said attempt. It was the accurate word. I drove home at 11:15 a.m. I changed out of the Blazer. I called my daughter Lynn, who is 29 and lives in Portland, and who has always had an efficient way of receiving news, inherited from her mother's side, and told her that Ruby had been added to a trust. Lynn went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad." Just that. The way she says things when she has more words than she needs and picks the right one. I said, "She's 7. She should have something that's hers." Lynn said, "I know. Thank you." I did not tell Lynn about Raymond. That was not what the call was about. Then I went out of the garage and I worked on the Buick LeSabre I've been restoring since October. A 2003 dark maroon, the kind of car that nobody restores because it isn't glamorous and it doesn't make anyone at a car show stop walking. I restore it because it was my father's and because working on it is the closest thing I have to sitting with him. I had the rear differential out and was cleaning it with a brush and a can of solvent, and I worked for 2 hours without thinking about Raymond Marsh at all. That is the thing about a decision that is already made. It doesn't need tending. The certified letter arrived at Raymond's house on March 14th, a Friday. I know this because Diane called me at 6:22 p.m. that evening. She didn't call from her cell phone. She called from the landline at her parents' house, which she only does when she is with her parents and doesn't want the call to be private. Or perhaps she does want it to be private and hasn't yet learned that I can hear the difference in the quality of her voice when her parents are in the room. "Cole," she said. "Diane. Dad got a letter from Beverly Holt." "I know," I said. There was a pause. Not a short one. "He's very upset," she said. "I imagine so," I said. "He says you ambushed him." I thought about that word. Ambushed. I thought about a Sunday dinner table with 8 people at it, and a man who waited until the pot roast was being served to deliver a public verdict on my character. That's an interesting word. I said, "Cole, we need to talk about this." "We do," I said. "I'm home on Saturday morning. Come for breakfast. Bring yourself and not your father." Another pause. Then, "Okay." She came on Saturday morning at 8:30 a.m. She came alone, as I had asked. She sat at the kitchen table with both hands around a mug of coffee, and she looked at me the way she has looked at me across difficult things for 26 years, not afraid, not accusatory, just present, waiting to hear what I would say. I told her what the document had contained, not the version Raymond had described to her, the version Beverly had identified, the POA language, the pathway to co-trusteeship before an incapacitation ruling. I told her that I did not believe Raymond had intended harm. I told her I believed he had intended control. And I told her that there was a difference between control that protects and control that simply displaces, that what Raymond had designed was a structure in which my own incapacitation would transfer authority over my life's work not to my wife alone, not to neutral fiduciary, but to her father. Diane was quiet for a long time. The Saturday morning sounds moved through the house. The heating system, a car passing on Sycamore Lane, the oak tree outside the kitchen window doing whatever oak trees do in March. She said, "He told me it was a standard planning document." "Parts of it are," I said. "The rest of it is not." She looked at the table. "I should have read it," she said. I said, "Yes." She looked up at me then, and I could see she was deciding whether to be hurt by that. She decided not to be. That is one of the things I love about Diane. The decisions she makes in the space between things, the ones nobody sees. "Did you have to do it without telling me?" she asked. I thought about that carefully, because she deserved a careful answer. "If I had told you," I said, "Raymond would have known before I got there." She didn't argue that. She knew it was true. We sat there for another hour. She cried twice, briefly, not from anger, from the particular kind of sadness that comes when you recognize that something you had chosen not to see has been there the whole time, waiting. I did not fill the silence. I let her have it. That is the right thing to do with that kind of sadness. By the time she left at 10:15, I did not know exactly where we stood, but we were standing together, which is what mattered. I want to tell you something about Raymond Marsh, because it matters to the story, and because I believe in being fair to people even when being fair costs you something. I have known Raymond for 27 years. I know the shape of him, and the shape of him was built in circumstances I did not have when I was deciding whether to be angry at him. Raymond grew up without money, not dramatically without. He wasn't hungry, he wasn't neglected, but without the kind of stability that makes you feel like things will hold. His father moved the family 3 times before Raymond was 16, always chasing a better job, always arriving somewhere new and starting over in a smaller house than the one before. What Raymond built in his adult life, the medical supply career, the house on Elmfield Drive, Gloria's catalog photograph kitchen. He built by gripping it hard, the way men who grew up watching things slip away learn to grip things. And what he found in his daughter's marriage, I think, was an extension of that grip, a continuation of what he had made, a place where the ground would not shift. He was not trying to take what was mine. I have sat with that long enough to believe it. He was trying to make sure that what his daughter had would never be threatened the way the things he loved had always seemed threatened. The fear behind what he did was real. The method was wrong. But I understand the fear. And I have thought about that more than once in a month since. in the way you think about a force you have had to work against and come to understand only after the work is done. Dennis came down from Roanoke on the 22nd of March. He stayed for a weekend. We worked on the Buick together. Dennis doesn't know engines well, but he is good at handing you tools and not asking questions you haven't invited, which is its own skill, rarer than most people realize. On Friday night, we made pot roast and cornbread, the ritual meal my mother made every other Friday when we were boys, and we ate at the kitchen table and did not talk about Raymond until I brought it up. She cried at breakfast. I said. Then she said she understood. Does she? Dennis said. I thought about that for a moment. Diane and I had sat at this table for 3 hours on that Saturday morning. She had said she understood why I felt threatened. I had said I didn't feel threatened. I had felt maneuvered, which is different. She had said she didn't know her father had identified the POA clause. I believed her. She had said she was sorry she hadn't said more at the dinner table. I believed that too. We had sat with a sorry for a while, without trying to solve it, which is something Diane and I have gotten better at over 26 years. The discipline of letting a hard thing be a hard thing without immediately reaching for a fix. She understands that I was right, I said to Dennis. I don't know yet if she understands why I waited 11 years to do it. Dennis was quiet. He broke his cornbread in half the way our mother used to. You did it when it was necessary, he said. I did it when he made it necessary, I said. There's a difference. Dennis nodded once, the way he does when a sentence has landed where it was meant to, and we finished dinner and did not talk about it again. On the second afternoon, Dennis and I were back in the garage. I had the rear alignment half done on the Buick, and I was showing him the particular rust pattern along the undercarriage that I had been fighting since October. Dennis crouched beside me with a flashlight and looked at it seriously, the way he looks at everything seriously, and said, You're going to get it. And I said I knew. And he said, Not the car. And I said I knew that too. Raymond Marsh called me on March 28th at 4:47 in the afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message that evening, standing in the kitchen with the chamomile steeping. He was composed. I will give him that without reservation. He said he felt I had acted without consultation. He said he hoped we could find a way to move forward as a family. He said he had only been trying to protect his daughter. His voice did not shake. He did not blame. He stated his position the way a man states a position when he is practicing being reasonable, which is not the same as being reasonable, but is at least the right direction. I called him back on March 30th. He answered on the first ring. I said, I heard your message, Raymond. I understand you feel blindsided. I want you to know that every document I signed is legal, proper, and in order. And I want you to know that the next conversation about the structure of my estate will go through Beverly Holt's office, not through Sunday dinner. He started to say something. I said, I hope you and Gloria are well. And I ended the call. I stood at the kitchen window for a moment afterward. The copper kettle on the stove was starting to steam. Outside, the dogwood was in full bloom now. Those 11 pale buds had come something real, white and certain against the March sky. I had counted them in the dark 3 weeks ago from the seat of my truck, when they were still only considering the idea of spring. They had not needed my permission to become what they were going to be. That was the last time Raymond and I discussed it. It is now the second week of September, 6 months since the dinner on Elmfield Drive. I am sitting on the porch on Sycamore Lane with a cup of chamomile. For minutes. Same as always, same ceramic mug. And the rose bushes have finished their summer run and are beginning to pull back into themselves the way they do every fall, tidy and unhurried. They were planted by the previous owners of this house, and they come back every spring, whether anyone tends them or not, which I have always found quietly admirable. They do not need to be told. They do not need to be convinced. They just do what they're going to do. Ruby visited for a week in July. She is 7 years old, and she has her mother's eyes in my laugh, which I consider an excellent distribution of the available material. She called the Buick the brown car and asked me why I was fixing something that was already broken, and I told her that fixing things is how some people say they love them, and she thought about that for a while, the serious thinking she does with her mouth slightly open, and then she said, like how you always fix my shoelaces when they come undone? And I said, yes, exactly like that. She was satisfied with that answer. We went back inside and made cornbread from a box. Her idea, not mine. And she ate 3 pieces and told me about a beetle she had found in Portland that she had named Gerald, which I found deeply reasonable. I don't know what the next year looks like with Raymond and Diane's family. I know that Diane and I are intact. I know that we have had 5 conversations since March that were harder than any we had in the previous 11 years, and that all 5 of them ended with us still at the same table, which I take as a good sign. I know that Raymond has not mentioned the trust document since the phone call. I know that Gloria sent me a birthday card in August with a $20 gift card to a hardware store, which I took as a peace offering coded in the only language she felt safe using, and which I accepted in exactly that spirit. What I did on that Monday morning was not revenge. I want to be clear about that. Revenge would have required more from me than I was willing to give. What I did was close a door that I had left open too long, and bolt it from the right side. There's a cost to closing doors. Even the right doors. Even the ones that needed closing. You don't get to walk away from that kind of surgery feeling whole. You walk away feeling accurate. That's different. Accuracy doesn't hug you back. It doesn't sit across from you at Sunday dinner. It doesn't call on a Tuesday evening to check in. What it does is hold. What it does is stay. And after long enough time of carrying things that didn't hold and didn't stay, I have come to understand that accurate is not a small thing. The rose bushes will bloom again in April. Ruby's trust is funded and in order. The Buick is almost done. It needs 1 more weekend on the rear alignment, and then I think I'll have it. The dogwood out front is already thinking about next spring, the way it always is this time of year, putting its energy into the root work that nobody sees, and that is the whole reason it blooms. The porch light is on and the neighborhood is quiet, and the chamomile is right. Exactly the way my father taught me. The way things are right when you have taken the time to do them properly. I'm okay. And the thing is, I mean it. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Quiet House Stories. I will see you on the next one.